Hello, my name is Rinon, and today we are going to be watching a POV that I recently managed to record in UCoB. Now, the other week on my twitch.tv I was subbing for a group. They were a UCoB pro group, they hadn't killed the fight yet, but we jumped in, we did a couple of hours practice, and we actually managed to get a kill. So what I thought we'd do here is we'd have a bit of a casual chat about UCoB. I'll talk about some of the mechanics that I think are interesting, some of the ones that I think aren't so interesting, and more importantly, I'm going to talk about how UCoB has changed over the past few years, because it's been out since 2017 now, it's been out almost 3 whole years, and the fight has changed quite a lot, so we're going to talk about that in a little more detail this video. In the next week or so I'm also going to be releasing an in-depth healer guide for UCoB in 2020, because I think a lot of the old guides cover mechanics, but they don't really cover things in detail like the mitigation you're going to use or the healing you're going to need to do for each trio. So I'm going to talk about that in more detail as well in a video very soon. So if you want to subscribe, I'd absolutely love that, that would help me a lot. So right now you're seeing Twintania in the background, and honestly this phase has changed a little bit since 2017. You're going to skip a lot of mechanics here. You're going to skip the second set of fireballs and stacks unless somebody manages to die somehow right at the start of the fight. You should honestly be skipping the last set of hatches and the stack damage and all of that stuff as well. And at the 44% push, you're going to skip the cleave from the boss as well. All of those are things that nowadays can be skipped pretty consistently even if people aren't potting. Honestly, this phase is so relaxed on healing, there's nothing to do. You're going to see throughout that phase that I leave a lot of the DPS low on HP and I just let Whispering Dawn do all of the work. On the whole, UCoB has changed quite a lot, and I'm going to talk about why it's changed quite a lot. First of all, we're level 80 now. While we get synced down to level 70, level syncing gives us natural stat buffs over what you would normally get if you're at level 70. So right now players have a lot more natural defense, they have a lot more natural damage that they're doing compared to what they would have been doing back in Stormblood. So honestly, the scaling of the fight on the whole is completely different. Another thing that's important is the game has been rebalanced. A lot of the classes have received balance changes, they've received buffs, and they play differently at level 70, they've had skills removed, things like that. Probably the biggest example of this is Gunbreaker, which was not in the game back when UCoB was a relevant fight, but now Gunbreaker is disgustingly strong. It's the strongest tank at level 70 by a mile. It does more damage and it has more mitigation, and if you're going back into UCoB nowadays, you should really try to bring a Gunbreaker. The other obvious thing is the fact that strategies have evolved. UCoB has been out 2.5 years now, and over time players have put together more and more refined and brain dead ways to deal with mechanics, so there's a very consistent, publicly available strategies almost everywhere to deal with most UCoB mechanics, and I would advise you follow them. You can see here we're transitioning into Nail. So Nail is one of the interesting phases I think, and it's received quite a few changes going into Shadowbringers, namely in the form of the quotes, because the quotes actually used to be completely different. I think this is mainly due to the fact that originally the quotes for UCoB Nail phase were very inconsistent, like the text didn't really line up to the mechanic and you had to use a lot of guesswork. So here's an example of the old Nail quote for the Dynamo into Chariot mechanic. It used to be, "O Red Moon, shine the path to conquest," right? I think the immediate question you might have is how the fuck does the word conquest relate to the mechanic Iron Chariot? That's not really an easy intuitive thing to learn, is it? So nowadays it's a lot better. Nowadays the quote for that is, "O hallowed moon, shine you the iron path." So it actually uses the word iron. If you see the word iron, you know that it's Iron Chariot. If you see the word hallowed moon or moon, you know it's Dynamo, Lunar Dynamo. The mechanics make sense with the names now, and I think that's a lot better. That's a really good change that they implemented. One thing to also note mechanically at the end of Nail is it's definitely possible that you do not get LB3 from naturally playing through the fight and doing everything correctly. So a lot of players do a couple of things to build LB to ensure that they have that LB3, which is for the Bahamut transition. One thing of note though, you can absolutely skip the LB3 if you want. You can use an LB2 and it will just require a bit extra healing from your healers to get through that. I guess while we're just dealing with Nail, I want to talk about the difficulty of UCoB nowadays, because I think it's a very interesting topic rating the 3 ultimates in terms of difficulty. Right now, the way they stand right now, I think the Ultima Weapon Ultimate is the easiest ultimate, and it's definitely the one that I would recommend players get into first. Then I would put UCoB second, because whilst UCoB has some very difficult mechanics and it's a really fun execution challenge and consistency challenge, nowadays the gear checks have become so low that it doesn't matter if players die. And you'll see that in this poll. There are multiple people dying in multiple phases, and it just doesn't matter at all, even for the average group. And I would put T as the highest, and that's not necessarily because I think it's the most difficult fight on content, but I think it's because it's the only fight that requires you both to do precise mechanics and do a lot of damage and play consistently at the same time right now. That's the only ultimate that requires all of those things at the same time. And let's be real, Wormhole is probably the hardest mechanic in the game in terms of execution. One thing I do still believe though is that UCoB, when it first launched, was the hardest ultimate on the whole, because the trios are an absolute enigma and it would take players hours and hours to get through single trios. And honestly, UCoB has the most fleshed out quote-unquote trios of any of the ultimates. They have these big armadas of multiple mechanics, just mechanical vomit coming at you all at the same time, and none of the other ultimates had more than 3 of them. UCoB have 6 if we include Grand Octet, and each of them is a big puzzle to solve on their own, both in healing, in mechanics, in mitigation, everything. And I think that the trios are the most interesting part of the ultimate fights, at least for me. So now the group is transitioning into Bahamut and we're about to start dealing with those trios ourselves. We're getting the Flatten first, the Tank Buster that's usually involved, and then we're going to go into Quick March Trio. Now for Quick March Trio, I feel that that can be one of the tougher mechanics to heal just in terms of player spacing. So I like to use a spread out low for that and stack up as much mitigation as possible, because if you can deal with this mechanic without healing too much in between, it makes it much more consistent. So what I like to do is do a big boy spread out low. You can do the Sucker Hero, you can skip it, and then I like to pop an Indom. You see there that the Bard in that case, he missed the Indom, so I did illustrate. But usually if your group's positioning is perfect, everything is working perfectly, and you're used to the group more importantly, just an Indom would be fine in between the hits. You can just do that and nothing else. One thing to note is that this is my first time playing with this group, so I'm not really used to their positioning. So I make a lot of safety plays and I do a lot of over mitigation, especially on tank damage here, just to make sure that everything's safe, because I don't know how the co-healer is healing, I don't know what the group's mitigation plan is up until this point, so I'm just kind of playing it by ear and trying my best to make sure that people don't die, to be honest. One thing I do want to mention here is the Blackfire Trio strat. That's the trio that you are seeing right now just being completed. I think that the Blackfire Trio strat that we're doing right here is the best, and it's by a noticeable margin. You see that what we do is we stack in the centre of the arena, we run towards Nail, but slightly to her left hand side, and we stutter step our way there. And then we take the stack damage and spread out to our towers, and we take the Mega Flare stack at the edge in front of Nail. This is really good because it allows players to move back and forth as needed. They have tons of space on the arena and they can adapt in case something goes wrong, and none of the other strats allow for that level of adaptation, and I think that's really important in ultimate fights, the ability to adapt quickly when something goes wrong, because you can save so many pulls with smart play. One thing to note during this phase again is that the DPS check is completely non-existent. You're going to see a little bit later into the phase when we reach Grand Octet, the DPS check there is to hit the boss to 59%. We're getting the boss close to 50%, and we are not pressing pop buttons, some players are dying, we are not playing super optimally on damage. It's so easy to meet the DPS checks. So when you're doing this fight, just please make sure that you are doing the mechanics. Don't worry about anything else, because the rest of the fight is going to solve itself for you. Honestly, the thing I like the most about UCoB is the way that the mechanics of the trios work and the way that they build on top of one another. They take the mechanics from Twintania that you see at the start of the fight and from Nail that you see in the second phase of the fight, and they build on them and combine them and add things every time. And every single time you're using knowledge that you've already gained earlier in the fight to use as a basis to solve this new challenge, and I think that is the most interesting way to do mechanics in this game. This fight also has some of the most interesting phases in Ultimate history. While I think that Twintania is not a very interesting first phase, in fact I think it's weaker than both Garuda and Living Liquid, I think that Nail is an incredibly interesting phase that really tests the player. It makes you become very aware of your debuffs and buffs. On the whole, it's just a really good player competency check, and I think that that's what you need in the second phase of an ultimate fight. It's a bit like a gatekeeper, like one of those you must be yay tall to enter this ride things at amusement parks. That's what Nail is for UCoB. The trios are also very interesting, and I think that while you're progressing through them, they're very unique mechanics to solve, and I think that it feels very rewarding when you get through them. However, I think that once you've seen all of the trios and you've cleared them once or twice, that phase feels like a bit of a filler. There's not really much going on. When we move forward into Ad phase, Ad phase is a very interesting phase because I think that there really aren't enough parts of Savage and Ultimate fights where you have multiple bosses at the same time, because a lot of players learn their rotation but they never learn to optimally deal damage to multiple targets and to deal with their AoE correctly, and I think that those phases really test that in a player, and that's another skill that players should have. It also acts a bit like a culmination of the fight in a way. You spent most of the fight dealing with Nail and Twintania mechanics, and now what you get here is Nail and Twintania mechanics on crack at the same time. You have to be really confident in all the mechanics that you've learned earlier in the fight, and you have to understand everything that's been put out before you in the last 11 minutes of gameplay. And also, honestly, I think that the UCoB weapons are really brilliant to look at. They're really a nice reward for all the work that you put into progressing through the fight. The main issue that I think that they have, honestly, is they're based on old Realm Reborn weapons, right? So they don't really have the same quality and consistency and design that some of the weapons that come later have. You can really see on some of the UCoB weapons that things can be a little bit pixely, and that's not really what you'd like from a weapon that you might have spent weeks or even months grinding towards earning. So right now we're going through Grand Octet, which is the mechanic that nobody does properly. The proper strat for Grand Octet is a bit insane, and it requires way too much of a big brain for most players, including me. I do not like doing Grand Octet correctly. You just Mario Kart it, to be honest, and then do the last part of the mechanic, and I would argue that every group should do that. Now that we got through that, we're moving on to Ad phase, which is the really interesting one, because Ad phase requires a lot more from the players now, even in 2020. Ad phase requires a lot of tank healing. The tanks take a lot of damage, not just from the tank busters, but also from the auto attacks. This is also the point where with this group I started doing callouts, because this group had never done a clean ad phase before. They had never seen Golden Bahamut, so I thought, I've got a little bit more experience in this fight, I should probably try and help out a little bit more. So from this point in time I start doing all of the callouts for the group, and I kind of act like an impromptu raid leader for the rest of the pull, just because I want to make sure that I'm doing a little bit more than just pressing my own buttons. What I like to do during the first part of ad phase is up until the generate cost, especially as a scholar, I like to sit on the butt of the boss, put the dots up, chain on Nail because that's who we'd agreed to burst on first, and then I like to spam Art of War up until I have to move away for the generate. This is a really easy and useful opportunity to contribute some massive DPS onto those ads and make sure that they burn nice and quickly. On the whole, I think that UCoB has changed a lot as a fight, and it's definitely easier than it used to be, but it's still a very fun fight, and I would recommend that people do it, get a couple of ultimate weapons. If you've cleared the Savage tier and you're waiting for something interesting to do in the run up to 5.3, get on board and give it a go. I'm going to do a much more in-depth healing analysis of UCoB in 2020 in the next week or so, and I think that that'll be useful for people that are progressing the fight for the first time in 2020. So please look forward to that. And if Ultimate isn't your thing, I'm also going to be working very soon on a White Mage damage optimization video that's going to talk about how you can do more damage in Savage content as a White Mage. So if any of that interests you, please feel free to subscribe, and please also feel free to follow me on twitch.tv, where I'm going to be streaming a lot of the footage capturing for those videos over the next week or so. When we actually hit Golden, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let the actual in-game sound do all of the work, and this is mainly because I think it's an excellent example of something I talked about in a previous video, and that is the importance of doing your research, staying calm, and listening to callouts from your raid leader or whoever is most comfortable with the phase. Because what I thought was really impressive about this group, and honestly props to those guys for it, is that we killed UCoB on their very first golden pull. We had one death, the ninja died to Exaflare, but aside from that, they played pretty flawlessly. They did all the mechanics correctly, they pressed all their mitigation buttons, and they did enough DPS to beat the fight. And that's all you can really ask for, to be honest, so absolutely amazing work by them, and congrats to them on the clear. So I'm going to fade out now. Thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day. I'll see you later this week. And then the first act morn is home gang.
Yeah.
Sharing second, right?
Yep. Second and fourth will be shared.
So remember, it's the second Exaflare and then move in. So
You can min me now, Matthew.
So you say it's mono first.
You got threat, right? Shinon?
What did I use too early?
You can pot.
Troubadour.
This is Adult Troubadour now.
stack.
Everyone else move, let the boss stay where it's facing. Move back. This is home gang.
Oh.
Okay, Exaflares. Look around the arena for them. They are two sides.
I get Eric.
Okay.
Easy.
Next up is Akmorn 2, which is shared between the tanks.
Keep him on the wall, right?
Okay.
Yeah. I think Buster's first. Probably use school as well.
Second Mornafar is going to be Gunbreaker cooldowns, and me.
I'm gonna reply as Omega.
Okay.
Another boss stick.
Gunbreaker cooldowns.
Okay. Should I take him back to the middle and invoke?
You could walk him
Yeah,
now,
yeah, pull him to the middle, yeah. It's going to be Exaflares again now.
Oh, it's next to me. This will work.
Next up is Mornafar 3. It's Warrior cooldowns, Addle. Everything else is me.
It's Monova first.
Okay.
So stick. And then
I've
Akmor.
got for the next one, yeah.
You just face into the edge with your...
Now
we've
is
got
the Bolide one. Do it at the end of the cast. After this, the boss will go middle again. Okay, Exaflares. D side.
Oh.
Yeah.
Don't get back over the risk that. But
It's going to be Mornafar 4. This is Gunbreaker cooldowns, Troubadour.
Stick.
Careful, fire.
Start up.
Then this is the shared tank buster where you pop every fucking cooldown you got.
Okay. We need a road here as well. Okay, here's Guns now.
Yep.
It's gonna hurt a lot.
Good. Pull it back to the middle for last Exaflares. After last Exaflares, burst.
Okay.
Back where we came from, 3 side.
Oh, shit.
This is going to be all mitigation, so that's Warrior cooldowns, Addle, and me.
My heart.
Okay, I'm gonna reprise this one.
And pops, if you haven't already used them, full raid burst.
This
Stack.
stick.
I've got her thingy as well. Hotline.
Is this
Just-
it? Is this it?
Okay, yet not
Now
red.
it's in rage, just burn and spread out. It's dead.
Yeah.
One shot.
The reason why
first type.
Let's fucking go!